Okay, people are joining promptly today. This is good. We normally have to wait 2 or 3 minutes before we have the majority join, but we've actually got some good numbers, so I think we'll get started. So first of all, thanks for joining. Thanks for taking part today. We've got a couple of our Creative CX clients on the call today, and I'll introduce them shortly. And we wanted to talk through some of the kind of themes that we've seen happening in the experimentation world lately. We posted something recently on LinkedIn around 5 themes, and I think it's probably important to flag that these are not themes that we think are essentially, they're not the top 5 things you should do in experimentation. They're really just what we've seen from what the work we were doing last year and what we've got planned for this year is there's real directional change and momentum change amongst a lot of businesses who are really focusing on experimentation to drive their customer experience forward. So, as I said, we've got 2 of our lovely clients today, and also one of my colleagues, Chris, to join. They hide it behind their cameras off at the moment, so they could open up their cameras and say hello to the world, guys, and we can get into the session. Chris, you were first, so do you want to do a quick intro?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm a Chief Experience Officer at Creative CX. Really happy to be here. And I head up the experimentation experts and also the UX part of Creative CX, and work with these amazing clients as well, like Investec and Hastings.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. And Alex, you were the next quickest on the camera trigger, so do you want to do a quick intro to yourself?
Sure thing. Hi everyone, great to be here. I'm Alex Bell. I'm the testing and experimentation lead at Investec, and I've been helping the growth and development of our experimentation program, working very closely with Creative CX to get that program off the ground, and we're just starting our 2nd year of that.
Good stuff. Thanks, Alex. And Hamish, last but not least.
Hey everyone. So I'm Hamish Bones. I'm the CRO manager at Hastings Direct. And similar to Alex, in fact, so we've just moved into our 2nd year, and it's all about testing client server and launching a brand new brand. So it's been an exciting year.
Great, thanks guys. So format for today, it's an unstructured conversation. I think, to be honest, on the topics we've got listed, we could probably cover more than an hour. What we'll try and do is keep it to say 45 minutes or so. Open up for questions for people who are dialed in and listening at the moment. You should find on the right hand side there a kind of a chat and poll section. If you have any questions as we go through the session, please pop them in there, and what we'll do is we'll try and put some time aside at the end to cover them off. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go through all the detail of this. There was an article we published a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, which was really the fruit of us reviewing what had happened in 2021 for Creative CX and all the amazing clients we work with, and also where the interests and plans for 2022 seem to be. And there was, when we pulled it all together, there was some really common themes that we really seemed to, they were from very disparate, different companies. We're quite fortunate at Creative CX that we have clients from all sorts of verticals and different industries. But there were some common themes that seemed consistent across all of those. And they're the ones that you can see listed here. And I'll very briefly kind of talk through what I mean by those 5 points. I think number 1, and they're not in a particular order either, I should add, but the first one there is about scaling the experimentation operating model. So in many cases for our clients, that's talking about centre of excellence. So we've been involved. I mean, we've been involved in centres of excellence setup for 5 years at Creative CX. But there's a noticeable difference, certainly from my perspective, that this seems about making it actually happen. So not just designing what a centre of excellence looks like or training a handful of people, but really operationalizing it and scaling it and getting lots of people involved. And I think we could probably talk as we get in with the panel a bit more about why that might be a bit later on. Another area where we've seen a lot of interest is experimenting in more of the user journey. So from if you go back to the traditional kind of A/B testing and CRO world, it tends to be very focused on in-session, in-moment activity and that part of the customer journey. And what we're seeing is a lot more consideration to the full user experience, from finding you in the first place as a brand and then arriving on your site, what you do, and then what happens after that experience on the site. And that's been very interesting for us. I think some of these, this is true of all 5 of these, a lot of these topics aren't new things. I think they're things that people have been doing for 10 plus years in many cases. And a lot of these is just that there's increased momentum and focus on doing it well. And I think number 3 very much fits in that category, and that's really a much more, a bigger focus on understanding your customers' needs at that point of interaction. So a better focus, or more of a focus on really understanding needs, not just having a pretty site or a best practice or a kind of a leading experience, but really what does my customer need in that moment and how can we better serve them. The 4th one we're going to talk about is personalization, which is a big topic for many people. And maybe I'll leave that. I think everyone knows, or certainly has some experience of what personalization is. I think one of the first questions we have to ask when we talk to our clients about that is what they mean and what scale, because it means different things to different people. And the last one really is just an interesting experience we had, and I think I'm going to ask Alex specifically about this one a bit later on, because I know that was one that you guys got involved in, which was when we use the tools of experimentation to prototype with live sites. So finding ways of validating and improving what we're going to build, using the tools in different ways to really use the power of experimentation to get the designs right before we move to the testing phase. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour. If you haven't, I've rabbited through it. I mean, obviously the article is there if you want to go read it. It's on LinkedIn somewhere. Maybe we can share it with people who are interested. It's really just an opinion, and a lot of today is just going to be opinions. It's just our thoughts based on what we see in the market. I guess, Chris, maybe I'll throw to you first. If I rush through that quite quickly, I'm wondering, is there anything I've missed in describing those 5 topics that you would call out?
No, I don't think so. I think the main one around, the interesting thing around the scaling and operating models is that actually I think it's quite easy to design a theoretically perfect kind of structure for this, but actually it's the practical side of things. It's actually getting people on board with the ideas, which is some of the which you'll find if you have to do it, is one of the toughest things. And it becomes more about kind of winning people over and actually just finding creative ways to describe why they should be experimenting in their particular area, where in fact in the past they've never really done it before and didn't see the need to. So I think it's kind of it's a people challenge really, but the most rewarding thing is when you do get them bought in, and then they suddenly start coming to you with loads of ideas, and they get excited about what they can do and come up with all kinds of crazy things which are completely not possible. But anyway, we're so happy that at least they've had those ideas. So I think that one definitely is really interesting, but it's quite tough also.
Okay, great. Well, should we focus on that one? So that first topic, I don't know, either Hamish or Alex, from either your current roles or in previous experiences, any thoughts on why that's different now, why things are changing?
Do you think there's something, I suppose, Alex, if you might, shall I go? I can go and then I'll pass the hand over.
Sure.
Do you think there's something, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because in past roles when I was working in consulting, and what I see today happening is that, Chris, you hit it on the head, it's around that kind of winning hearts and minds piece. It's around that kind of element of how do you engage with multiple stakeholders and teams and business owners and drive that communication of, well, look, I've got this amazing methodology we're going to follow and process to increase our velocity, increase our, the hallowed term of win rate and driving commercial benefit. But actually the real challenge is once you've shared that, it's then not falling apart. So the real challenge is then like actually putting in those regular sessions, actually putting in those regular meetings where, you're consistently talking to these people and you're always got those communication lines open. Because the biggest factor that I've seen when it has the best impact is by going up to people and sort of saying, right, we're going to do this, but we need you to do this. And we want you to input and we want you to kind of like give us your views. But if you don't have both, and if you're not flexible to see that sometimes you're going to have to, there's things to stand on a hill and put your flag on and kind of go, no, we won't do this. But actually you kind of have to have that flexibility, because to really scale a model from, running 1 or 2 tests a month or a quarter to running a program which uses solid data, insight, you're driving prioritization, you kind of have to be able to kind of move flexibly. Oof, it's been a long morning already, guys. Sorry. but you really need to have that methodology of sort of like, it's almost that term of kind of governance, but it's almost that kind of ability to be able to say, we need you all to come to us, and we need to be able to come to you in a way that, you know, you see what we do, and you have to be really transparent, and you have to be really kind of like flexible in how you approach people. That's probably what I've learned the most around building a program which you can scale, and isn't just this moment of kind of like, you have this huge peak and then it all just dives because you haven't kind of like thought about the next step, and it's not effective because it won't last long. It's the growth and then the consistency of it to grow.
I think there's also something in where experimentation programs tend to start. So at Investec, this has been something that's been very much owned by digital marketing, because we had a clear goal that we wanted to, of course, increase the number of leads that we had through our business, because we've got a bottom line that we need to be thinking about. But scaling that model does also mean beginning to work with other teams and other functional teams and moving thinking beyond just conversion rate optimization. And we know that experimentation now has moved beyond just CRO, but it's how do you communicate that to the rest of the business and explain that experimentation, particularly when we start thinking about experimenting in other parts of the user journey, it isn't just about getting more leads down the funnel. It's about improving your user experience and making it better for your audiences across all those different channels. And I think once you start talking about the scalability of that and thinking about increasing the velocity of that testing to not just meet that single goal of increasing leads, it does change the perception of the test a lot. But that means, as you say, the flexibility needs to be there, but transparency also needs to be there. You need to have these really open conversations about what you're trying to achieve. But there is also this fantastic light bulb moment, and Chris, I think you referred to that just briefly, is when people do start beginning to see the value that it has for them, because it could be parts of the business that don't just rest on, say, a lead submission as one of their key performance indicators. When you start talking to them about what experimentation can unpack, the light bulb moment goes off, and people do start coming to you to talk about how they can get involved. So for us, I see our experimentation really scaling beyond just marketing, which is a really exciting place to be.
That's great. Thanks both. I think you both kind of answered it, because one thing I have lots of theoretical debates with people about whether this kind of change has to be top down and bottom up. We put it in that article that we published as well, because it reminds me of in a former life, I was involved in a lot of when businesses were first moving to agile. And there were some businesses that went agile because someone in the C-suite did a tour of America and came back and said, right, tomorrow, your jobs change, everyone. And from now on, this is the way you work. And there were other people who spun off little teams to show what you can do if you work differently. And there were pros and cons to both approaches. And bringing it back to the experimentation world, I've heard lots of people who work in quite mature businesses who are scaling their experimentation. And I don't feel like I think I'm a bit of a wishy-washy answer. It's a bit of both. I feel like, I think you're kind of saying that there, particularly Alex, in that if you need sort of senior stakeholders to believe in it as well, to set objectives and set direction. Otherwise, people just revert back to conditioned behaviour. But also, the sort of the people on the ground getting stuff done need to believe in it. Otherwise, you're imposing a change. And most of those people didn't sign up for that job, did they? They signed up for a different job originally.
Yeah, I mean, talking about experimentation, when I got into the world of marketing, that wasn't really a job that you got into. So it's definitely something that's developed. But I don't think it's a wishy-washy answer. I think you do need both. You do absolutely need that senior leadership buy-in, but also knowing that senior leaders can sometimes be some of the most difficult clients, because they're the ones who want to see the money at the end. They want to see the revenue figure that is attributed to whatever test that you're doing. And because we're looking at experimentation across areas where potentially you're not always going to be looking at, say, a lead submission or a conversion rate, you need other people in your team to really believe in it, because they're going to action it and make it part of their everyday. The way that we're trying to position our experimentation is that it's an always-on approach to what we do, and that experimentation needs to lead the decision-making and not be a result of the decision-making. And we already as a business like to say that we're very data driven, but I think having the experimentation first approach means that we're not just making decisions off the back or off the back of a single set of data. We're making decisions about continuous improvement, and that conversation is a slightly different thing than just saying we're going to use data to make our decisions. And having both sides of the coin involved, so having, of course, your senior leadership buy-in, and then the rest of the teams involved in that, means a cultural shift. But if you've got both thinking about that ultimate continuous improvement aim, I think it's really helpful.
Do you think it's quite funny, isn't it? Because sorry, but I think, Alex, you're actually spot on, because there's this. I think to be successful in growing a scaling model, right, and building that platform to be able to run an always-on program, which is kind of what all the senior stakeholders in any business want, and because it's that dream of being able to consistently benefit and show revenue or growth or more leads, etc. Those major KPIs for a business is really important. But it's something that always happens, is that I was at an event last week and I heard the term, and it was written, and it couldn't be any more accurate. It's Peter Drucker, and he said, if you can't measure it, you can't change it. And I feel that's really, really important thing to say, which is, the way you build a successful model is by getting the basics right. And I think a lot of companies, and a lot of my experience has seen, is that when they're not getting it right, it's usually because they don't have the data, or it's usually because they think they have the data, but actually, they've made decisions to push on faster or push on harder, and actually it's affecting them later in the game. Previously, when I've been consulting, I've seen that quite a lot. And it's actually the real battle sometimes is just aligning everyone to be able to say, okay, so what do we need to be able to run this testing program? Well, actually, you need to be passionate and show the reason, and eloquently, and sometimes it does come down to basics, where actually spending half a day on a presentation to be able to explain the difference of CRO or experimentation, or being able to show the importance of it and get those opportunities with stakeholders, I can't actually recommend enough. Being able to always take those opportunities to sit in front of your CMO or your director or whoever it is and be able to talk about it. That's what makes people listen, I've seen. And that's where, getting and building a team around you of passionate people who's, instead of say, oh no, we can't do something like that, but actually say, look, we don't recommend doing it, but to make it work, we can do X, Y, and Z. That's kind of how I've seen these models being able to be constructive.
Yeah.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Hamish, with the talk about alignment. I think that alignment is fundamental. Something that we've been trying to implement is a group alignment on our objectives and our key results, so that whatever objective we have within our experimentation program is mirrored by objectives within other parts of the business, so that everybody's thinking with the same kind of lens. And it's probably the first time these kind of aligned conversations have taken place. And it's not just within experimentation that you need to have those that shared set of objectives. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that the experimentation is the catalyst for alignment, because it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's not the sole purpose of it to align goals, but it's become the common fact of it everybody has. So it's a kind of a consequence of it, isn't it? I guess, Alex.
Consequence, but also, I mean, I'm sure everybody's going to be sick of me saying in every meeting that, we need to make sure that we are testing appropriately and that we are reaching a level of confidence in whatever changes that we're making. But I think it is important that when we are talking about shared objectives, that there is always the shared goal of continuous improvement. And for a business like Investec, and I don't know if it's the same at Hastings, Hamish, but for us, it's been a real shift towards continuous improvement thinking than just, doing everything that we need to do immediately and just keep moving at this crazy pace without really experimenting, without really understanding what the data was telling us. So it is a massive shift away from where we were.
I couldn't agree more. It's been really fascinating, very stretched. I'm sure some of you may have seen, we've rebranded Hastings over the last year. There's been a massive digital transformation. at Hastings, where we've changed our architecture, but also how we look and our branding and how it feels and the UI of it. And the journey's been released. There's been a lot of news on it. We've gotten rid of Harry, sadly. But now we have flying cars and all sorts of things in our new brand, and it looks very good. It's really exciting. But what we saw is that need for growth, for that always on, for that continuous improvement. That we've released a new program, we've released a new journey, but what do we do now? And it's that belief of like, well, now we need to optimize, we need to test it, we need to really get into our backlogs with product teams, and we really need to align those so that we can support them, so that our testing team can support them and give them more data, so they know what their day 2 backlogs look like, and their product backlogs can align, and we can support them releasing the right things, and give them the best opportunity. And I think that's a really important thing, is that it's that communication, it's that working with people, not against people. That's how you build a successful program. If you don't take people along with you, you're not going to be successful, and I think, Mark, you said it in your article with there's 2 approaches, right? You have the top down or you have down top, right? Both have pluses, pros and cons. So, some companies have very passionate C-suite where they come in, exec board members, and there's one who's got like loads of passion around testing and optimization, and they come in as their leader. And then they go bottom, and they literally go, right, we need to do things like this. Some companies aren't that lucky. Some companies do it slightly differently, where their teams, it starts from the bottom up, and you've got to be passionate and you've got to drive that. And the way to make that work is by making sure, people feel a part of it. You take in everybody. I can't run a program by myself where I am. I can't do it. There's so many different owners, there's so many different people that need to come along with me. We have designers, we have a CX hub, we have different teams, analytics, etc., who come into this and come into a program. So a simple roadmap actually has multiple different test points and touch points. So it means you've got to be, it's almost going back to like program management in some ways, but you've got to build it up. That's kind of where I've seen success.
Yeah. And I think because I'm thinking about some of the other topics we've got there, and actually the prototyping one, that's a number 5, jumping to number 5. I know for me, although that was a really interesting kind of exercise, and I mentioned earlier, Alex, we were going to talk to you about that because that was particularly something you guys have done. But I think for me, the real success from that really came from sort of how you engage the wider business. So, I mean, it'd be great if you give us a background of what we mean or what the process you went through for this particular thing. But for me, results aside, and actually you've shared some slides, haven't you, some results, which I can show when you're ready to have the grand reveal.
The big reveal.
The real thing for me, and this is a challenge we face all the time as a consultancy business, is how we kind of engage with the broader business and show why you should be doing this more. And actually, Alex, if you tell us a bit more about the particular example here, then we can build on that.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think we did live prototyping with Creative CX to solve a real problem that we had with something that was really something we were struggling with from an experimentation perspective, was the conflicting needs of the business. So last year we launched a new corporate identity. We've been going through a web refresh. We've been changing so much about our digital architecture, and it's been an incredibly exciting time, but we've had a few conflicting needs. We've had a clear need from the business to implement things at a huge amount of pace and make sure that we're delivering very, very quickly. We've had a bunch of very beautiful designs from our design agency, which have been wonderful to see. And then there's been the other side of the business who back experimentation, who really wanted confidence that every change that we were making was going to be to the benefit of our users. And in the navigation of our website, we knew the feedback from the business that our old navigation wasn't working. We needed something new. And part of the new designs that were incorporated within our new corporate identity were lovely new designs for navigation that needed to be delivered at pace and with confidence, and we needed to choose some new design to go with. And this had the potential to create basically this perfect storm, because you had everybody shouting from their corner about what we wanted. And we could have gone with one of two things. We could have said, okay, we need to deliver this at a huge amount of speed, but we're not going to have the confidence. So we're just going to roll something out and maybe optimize once it's live. Or we can go through a really rigorous process of user testing, really understand what will be best for our user before we roll anything out. But that's going to be at the expense of any kind of time frame. So with this in mind, Creative CX, you guys were amazing at coming to us with a solution that could help us bring both these needs together. And the live prototype solution was something that would give us a level of confidence that we'd be happy to roll out a live experiment with a new design, but also then get some really great, meaningful feedback from our users at a huge amount of pace. So the team took the new designs that were created by our design agency and created design variants as experiments on Optimizely, which we use for our testing. And we were able to use those variants as live prototypes in a user testing phase. So the normal moderated testing that we do, but instead of having normal flat prototypes or Figma designs with limited functionality, we're able to simulate an as live experience for our users. And I think the real value in this, particularly from getting the insight, is we all know that there's a difference between the things that people say and the things that people do. And the live prototype meant that because we were giving people an as near as damn it live experience, we were able to very easily understand not just what they were doing, but also what people were saying while they were in a moderated testing phase. So the insight that we got was incredibly valuable. And a really fundamental thing was that it completely tested our own assumptions about what would be best for our users. So the two designs that we had put into testing, it turned out that neither were actually going to provide the best solution for our user experience. And it was a hybrid approach that really was ultimately the best solution for our users. And because all of this was already designed and built on Optimizely, at the end of the user testing phase, we were able to iterate on essentially a live experiment and roll out that experiment at a large scale to our audience at a huge amount of pace and get very, very quick results. And the results, if we flip over to the results screen, Chris and Mark, it was just the change and the level of engagement difference that we saw was huge. That 118% overall increase engagement with our menu structure was absolutely massive, given that we had so much feedback that people weren't able to navigate correctly. When we talk about the primary nav, our nav was always sitting behind a burger menu, traditional burger menu before, and we had a 310% engagement increase compared to that control by having the primary nav in the top. And when we talk about that tertiary nav, I think this was really important because the secondary and tertiary navigation that we have is part of our hybrid approach. Those were menu structures that already existed within our old menu, but because it wasn't surfaced properly, people weren't engaging with those levels in our menu. And through this experimentation, we were able to roll this out and see this kind of change. So for me, I think the prototyping was just such an innovative way to get really great, meaningful insight, to roll out the experiment Optimizely at speed and provide confidence that the business was able to provide a better user experience for everybody. So I'm very, very proud of this.
Sorry, I'll leave your slide there for a second. So you're so proud. Yeah, I mean, it's thanks for that, Alex. I think it's great to have some stats on a slide as well. We haven't got a lot of slides today. I think, and when I introduced the topic to you just then, I was thinking a lot about that kind of senior stakeholder engagement and how that kind of really put testing experimentation on the radar of some senior managers who kind of weren't used to working that way. And I think, Chris, I'd be interested to hear from the work we do with other teams, because I think, as you were describing that, Alex, it also made me think of what we're seeing as we expand beyond, CRO or A/B testing as it used to be done was very kind of a niche thing in the corner of a building for some businesses and didn't really engage with product teams and experience teams and other teams. And as we are scaling experimentation, bringing it back to that first topic, we're seeing that demonstrating that we can help them not roll out bad things is actually, I think, mitigating risk has become an increasing kind of priority for us, where if you go back 4 or 5 years, it was always about optimizing conversion rate. I wonder, Chris, like if you're from other client experience we did last year, whether what you're seeing there in that change from using experimentation as a tool to mitigate risk as opposed to just driving conversion.
I mean, I think back to some of the earlier discussions, Hamish and Alex, you were having about the, scaling. I think one of the really interesting things is about is actually to reposition A/B testing, not just all about A/B testing, because actually, if you start to reposition it as just or operationalize it, I mean, it's great to hear that you guys are getting nearer to making it like the default part of the process, because that's ultimately the goal, isn't it? Rather than just, like you said, Mark, a small team doing it. You want to make it part of your normal process, part of any of the team's processes. Eventually, that's the end goal. But I think in the mitigating risk, one of the key things about selling the benefits of it is just saying you can be more creative, actually. And sometimes people have the misgiving, really, that it'll put more restrictions on them and it'll be restrictive. And actually it's just, oh, they're going to measure everything I do now, so we need to play it safe. But actually the reverse is true completely. Or some of those ideas that you would have completely just rejected years ago, now you can revisit. And that's a really exciting thing. And I think the other thing about the great work that Alex has been doing around combining those methods, and that was really fun to work on that with you, is that actually the user testing side brings the human element back into the story, doesn't it? And I think that can really engage senior stakeholders. Because then if you've got the experimentation side, which is the scaling, seeing what impact at scale, but also in user testing, you really get closer to understand what's going on. And it's that combination of understanding first and then getting the best quality variations we can, but still really going for it and having differences. But then experimentation is the only way you can really finally find out what the impact is at scale. What's the impact on customers at scale, and critically the business as well. So I think just combination of methodologies is really, really good.
Yeah.
I know in a business like ours, we can tend to focus a lot just on our performance metrics rather than maybe any behavioral insight. And user testing, particularly if you're user testing in an environment that is as close to live as you can, you're getting really meaningful insight that changes the perception, particularly in those senior stakeholders, because the second that they can get that almost verbal feedback to say, oh, I'm really struggling to do this thing, or I really like this certain element, it changes the perception rather than just being a number on a page. And having the combination of both, I think, is the sweet spot.
I think just to add in a point there, because I think you couldn't be any more spot on, Alex. I think the case study, the experience you went through is really powerful, because what it does, and I'm not sure if everyone's going to agree with me, but I'm going to go and say it, is that I think best practice for a journey, for a design, right? It doesn't guarantee you anything, guys. It's really simple. Like, it doesn't guarantee you anything. And people will be like, oh, but we're following a best practice, like, methodology of design, which follows a UI that's accepted already in the industry or the market, or, for this journey type. And it's sort of like, yeah, but does it work? Probably not. And I feel like, it's always important to say that. One of the things that I constantly hate is when people sit there and you do like design by committee, or you do like, where everybody sits on there and starts going, oh, well, I think that. And it's just like, great, I think that this happens, but that's my personal view. Like, it's really embarrassing. So I'm going to be honest, Mark. It took me almost 15 minutes to work out how to dial into this today. And I found myself quite a tech savvy person, but it took me 10 minutes to do it. And, it's not groundbreaking to understand the simplicity of the fact that we know our companies, our products, our services inside out, right? Because that's our job. The one thing that we do need to know and do need to do better is to understand our customer voice, our customer intent. Why are users engaging with us in that way? Do you even know the way that they're engaging with you? And that goes back to my data point, which is, if you don't have the basics set up, you're gonna fail, full stop. You're gonna fail at the first hurdle. So it's really important. And the way that you do that is you don't make enemies. You don't sit there and go, oh, well, your design is shit. Sorry, your design is not good. So, but full stop. It's like, that's not what you're saying. What you need to engage people. You need to say, let me help you make this better. Let's test it. Let's do it. Let's put it out. Let's try it. And that's the thing that people need to remember. And I think, if you look at these 5 themes for the year, you think about all the research that's been going into prototyping with live sites. So like, live proving, it's such a big, powerful way to get data fast on a big change. Personalization. Personalization is really important, but again, the first step is understanding the data, understanding your products. You know, if you can't access the data, then you don't have to go super detailed in personalization. You can start basics, start with new and returning, start with, you know, current customers and new business. Start with by separating it out like that. You know, it's how do you want to, that's what, in some ways, I believe that some of these are actually intertwined with each other. And, you know, to get a scaling experimentation program, you need to better anticipate the needs of your user. You need to be able to be more open to experimenting in more of the user journey, because this all feeds into, you know, how you now will build a successful program in the long term. From I think what we've been discussing, especially the four of us over the last few weeks, off and on, definitely me more off than on, as I should have been. Again, hands up on that. But I feel passionate about that, which is, it's all about how you communicate internally. It's all about how you bring people with you. And if you're not going to do that successfully, then you're not going to be able to get where you want. But yeah, I think it's great. That case study, Alex, says it all. You know, it's like, you know, you did two different designs and neither of them fitted the needs of your customers. And I imagine there was people in the business sitting there going, oh, this is excellent, this will be amazing. And it's like, it's not about proving someone wrong. It's about actually getting them to a better place and better understanding.
Yeah.
So 100%.
We had a lot of discussions both with our different stakeholders in our project, but also with our designers about intention, because I think there is always good intention. There's an intention whether you're looking at best practice. There's intention when you're talking about the business. But fundamentally, your users and your audience, they don't care about your intention. They're just trying to find something. And if they're able to either navigate quickly or find something that they want to do, then that's brilliant. And it's our job to anticipate those needs, right? That's the whole point. And I think why this experiment and why this whole project has been so important, particularly for our stakeholders and talking about scaling our experimentation program, because it really helped them understand that it isn't about just testing assumption. It's about taking a proper hypothesis and putting it into an experimentation program for the best result for our user and putting the user at the very center of what we're trying to do. And that's, yeah, like I say, light bulb moments everywhere.
It's like, in some ways, it's the it's on what you were saying, Hamish. It's when people reach that realization that every design or opinion is actually just a hypothesis, actually, and that's a bit of a certain stage, isn't it, for people to realize? Because remember, some of those people have been doing the same thing for 10 years without actually probably understanding what the impact is on customers, because it's just their job, isn't it? And also the other thing is, if you're really senior, sometimes you've been paid to make good decisions in all your life, haven't you? So then that can be quite a challenge, because now your opinions are going to be tested, aren't they? And that's a tricky one.
Yeah, that's quite a common one. It's quite a change, I think, for everyone, and senior people especially. But I think, you know, I'm guilty of that, in that through my career, I've been paid to have the answers to things and have the solution and to be the person who comes up with an idea. And it's difficult to then sort of reposition yourself to actually just enable the process, as opposed to having the bright idea that changes everything. And I think that touches on the scaling thing and a few of the topics we talked about. And that's it's a cultural thing, isn't it?
It's a really good point, Mark, isn't it? Because that's things like, you get paid to deliver an idea or a result, right? But actually, if you think about what we're trying to achieve, we're not actually we need to be there to be the support, the process, the mechanism, and the ability for people to get the result, right? So we're not there to give them an answer. We're there to give them the ability to find the answer, to get to the better aspect, to drive conversion rate, to drive revenue, to drive, like, you know, whatever it is. And we're the ones that give them the ability to do that. And it's about just being really, like, goes back to transparent, goes back to passion. I think whenever I've seen people really passionately talk about this type of subjects, you always get that feeling of like, actually, that sounds really cool and interesting. I mean, it's incredibly anarchy. It's a bit like Fun with Flags, you know, with the Big Bang Theory. It's sort of like, you know, only certain people really are as passionate as certain people when it comes to it. But it helps when you're able to bring a company with you, or multiple teams. Because Alex, I mean, I think, tell me if you're the same, but I probably spend my day talking to about, probably 4 to 5 completely different teams, on an average day to talk about one test sometimes, or one program, or one roadmap. And it's that need to always think about, for each one of these people, they've got different KPIs, they've got different goals, different expectations, and it all happens where does experimentation sit in a company, and how do they want to see experimentation or CRO expand and support it? And if you're sitting in just one aspect of it, that's going to be more struggle than if you're more centralized and more able to kind of spread yourself out. And I think it's that ability to have those conversations of, I want to help you, but how do we help you in the best way possible so that we're ticking all our boxes and getting the right outcome for the customer and the company, not necessarily for me or you personally, for our goals. And I think it's that balance as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think for year one of our experimentation, one of the core goals that we had was education, because education, it needed to go across the business. We needed to expand our thinking beyond just marketing. And though it started in marketing and grew in marketing, it's a program and a way of thinking that needs to be adopted culturally across the business. So like you, I speak to a lot of different people every day, sometimes about the same thing. And I'm completely okay with that because I love talking about it, as you may have noticed. But I think it's also really important because it helps identify who your ambassadors are going to be. And you need those ambassadors because the more people that you have talking about the value of experimentation, it means that it's not just, in my case, a one-woman band always harping on about the same thing. And as we start moving towards the experimentation and thinking about experimenting across more of the user journey, you do need more of those people to talk about the value of those different, either different channels or those different journeys that they have with their clients. So that is a very, very valuable part of our program. And something I'd recommend is making sure that education is your own metric for success for your experimentation program, and how many times you're speaking to people, how many people are getting on board. For us, that's been a really important, crucial thing.
Yeah, definitely agree. 100%. It's being able to educate in a positive manner, because you don't want to turn into get too preachy about it. But at the same time, it's about educating in a positive manner, which brings people to you instead of you're always going to them. The biggest sign of success for any consultancy who works with a company, I'd reckon, or for an in-house team that's building capability, right? I think is when you start getting approached from different teams who you haven't approached before, and they start going, oh, can I just get 5 minutes of your time just to talk about this? Like, I'd really like to discuss this. That's a great sign. That means you're making progress in your success when other teams individually reach out to you, or to, Mark, to you guys and Chris, when you're working with a specific part of a company, but then other parts start looking for your time, that must make you feel like, yeah, I'm doing all right here. This is good. I mean, I could do with some more time in the day to work out how I'm going to answer their questions, but it's clearly working. I think it's the thing. It's that transparency on honest part, right? You might not be able to help everyone on day one. You just got to accept that.
And that's a good problem to have. I was just going to say, that's a good problem to have. It's too many enthusiastic people bombarding you with ideas and wanting to get involved is a great problem. It is a problem because they need to think about the structure and the process to handle all those ideas and really make sure you don't disappoint them and give them the time and things like that. But it's a great point to get to that level again.
Yeah. And just to slightly change, we're talking a lot about internal stakeholders, but also there's another stakeholder, an important stakeholder is our end customers. I think, Hamish, you were saying earlier about kind of best practice design. As you were first describing that, I was starting to think, well, is that in number 2, experimenting in more of the user journey, or is it anticipation of needs? And as you rightly went on to explain, actually, that all these things are intertwined and they don't really stand alone. But I think that if I pick on sort of 2 and 3 there, the thing for me where if you're a traditional CRO team, you sort of own the website, there's 2 things. One thing you mentioned earlier, Hamish, is we're a bit too close to our products maybe, and it's hard for us to understand the language or the needs of the customer because we're not in their mind, we're not in that. And also we tend to focus on our part of that interaction, whereas actually several steps before they got to where you meet them, they've had other interactions with your brand and proposition, and that can be in more of the user journey. That can be the end-to-end customer journey, which in my many years in kind of digital. It's been talked about for years, but it's very, very seriously a focus of a lot of businesses now. Is thinking more about how it's consistent, but also when we do meet them in the place that we own and the place that we can affect, how do we better understand what they're likely to need from us? And one thing I've always wondered is how much experimentation or testing actually happens in other channels that the four of us aren't directly working with every day. I've moved around a bit. I'm sure in the display world, in the search and advertising world, there is testing happening. I'm sure it happens in CRM, but I'm pretty sure it's never joined up in terms of the insight and how we make it consistent.
And that's something we've been dealing with quite a lot, actually. And I've seen in the past a lot in specific companies. I suspect, Alex, you may have this in your area for some parts where, some businesses have huge pricing teams, have huge teams that deal with, digital marketing. So we've got SEO, we've got PPC, we've got everything, including TV, radio, branding, offline ads as well. And there's a lot of activity, which sometimes you're sort of like hearing in the background of like some big team meeting. You're literally like, oh, that would have been helpful to have known that. That would have explained why I saw this happening on my test that I was running. So a lot of it is actually like being able to be aware of these factors where necessarily you don't need to get involved, but actually just being aware of it, being open about what you're doing, and then they'll share back to you. And it happens a lot, and our teams are constantly testing in our business. Obviously, Alex, I bet you have it in Investec where, you're constantly testing, whether it's on one thing or another thing, or, whether it's your devs and product teams driving out more. It never stops. And it's just always having that aspect of like, right, I'm going to be sending out my roadmap for the next 4 weeks. And this is what it's going to look like. These are the dates for it, and this is how we're going to execute. And that means you've shared your piece. And then that means you can hopefully make sure you've been really clear on what's happening. And then when something does go wrong, you're sort of sitting there going, right, okay, what did these guys do? What has happened over there? It happens a lot. And you're not going to always be able to control everything. That's the thing you've got to realize. The jobs that we do, and the job that, Alex, you and I do, we can't control everything. There's multiple people who own different parts of a journey or a website. Sometimes one part of it, is owned by, there's about 5 or 10 different people who can input in what you're doing. So you're not going to have an understanding of everything that goes on. All you can do is do the best you can. And I feel like as long as you've been transparent with your roadmap and you've been transparent with what you're doing when you're doing it, then that covers you. That gives you the ability to drive it. I'm going to stop talking and go on mute. Off.
I think what we've definitely found, and again, this comes down to where has experimentation got its roots, and for us, it's still sitting very much within marketing. So our marketing initiatives do tend to have the benefit of experimentation because I sit within those circles and I can hear, and I'm part of the planning sessions when we're talking about campaign activity, and we understand like what journeys we're sending people on, how can we begin to optimize those different journeys and think about it in one single view rather than in individual views, which is traditionally how it's always been done. But yeah, I mean, to Hamish, to your point, thinking about it beyond just, say, the marketing structure, it's not possible for one person to be across all of that at the same time. But that's why building those relationships and finding the ambassadors is really important. So we're thinking about how do we grow our kind of BAU experimentation beyond just the marketing team. How can people who are involved in CX and UX, how can they get involved in all working towards a similar shared set of objectives, but operate in a way that's more independent and isn't just always coming through me? And that's probably the next phase in our second year of experimentation, is how do we build that capability out for everybody.
Yeah, and there's many years ago, I remember, it kind of reminds me of I think you mentioned it earlier actually, Hamish, around kind of personalization not necessarily needing to be, I mean, when I first encountered personalization many years ago, it was very much about one-to-one. Like I know John and what he had for lunch, and I'm going to offer him a very relevant product based on his 10-year history with us. And I work with consultants who really struggle with the difference between personalization and contextualization. I think it's talk about like having contextual changes to the experience. But I think that's where sort of maybe that anticipation of user needs and personalization starts to blur a little bit. I think you use the example of, someone coming from a search engine for a business like Hastings. I'd imagine that the aggregators are part of the typical journey, and it's a different experience for different customers. And it's just being conscious of that and considering the user perspective of the bit that led before the bit we're at now, if that makes sense.
Personalization works differently for everyone. Personalization for Hastings is going to be very different from personalizations for Investec with Alex. We're going to be running different things. I think the key thing is, you said it, Mark, a few years ago, it was all about one-to-one personalization, right? And I'm yet to see a company, apart from Netflix and maybe Amazon Prime and Disney, who can actually personalize one-to-one that suits my needs and what I want to do. I brought something on Amazon a few weeks ago, and it recommended me the exact same product, but just in a slightly different color. And I was just sort of like, well, why would I want to buy like another one of that? Like, it just doesn't make sense for me. I'm not that person. So like, for me, I find it more annoying and frustrating. So when personalization fails, actually, I think it has a bigger impact than not doing it at all. And in my view, I'm sort of like, if you need to start with personalization by thinking, right, here's what we know about our customers today. Here's what we understand about what they do. How can we start to think about, increasing our activity for that particular segment? And how can we look at that segment and influence what we do with new versus old, and recurring and returning? And it all based on your product. If you're selling, clothes, it's a bit different to me selling a product which isn't seen as sexy, but is a need. We're a must-have for people because it's a requirement for you to sit there. If you own a car, you need car insurance, right? Somebody doesn't want to be sexily sold, the pink version of what we're doing or something crazy like that. I don't know, but we need to be more intelligent by how we do it, because we're constrained by what we sell. So you need to be able to personalize based on using data. You need to use your data smartly, and we need to think about how you use your tools. So Alex uses Optimisely, we use Monetate, and it's about how do we input these into our architectures to get access to our data layer, to our CDPs, to our CRM systems, etc. And that's the important thing, is working that out as a first step.
And I think that technical aspect, I think there's another element, like the examples you gave of the Netflix, although Netflix thinks I like a lot of Disney princess programs, which might be to do with my daughters, or may not be, I don't know. But that what Netflix and Amazon have is a reason for the customer to self-identify. And obviously they engage more frequently than your average insurance buyer. So it's a different world, like you say. So they're in the fortunate position that they have a good reason for the customer to tell them who they are from the first interaction and go on from there. But then they've really learned to really use that, and that's why they're the examples that everyone looks at. But I think in the past, as the cookie world has changed over 10 plus years, it's been, do you kind of panic and think, well, we can't target someone because we don't know enough about them, or is there a way of, it's almost a service design thing, is there a value we can provide to the customer that they would make it their life better and actually make us better at our job as well? And that's, I think sometimes it's not always a technical consideration, but it's a proposition question.
Yeah, I think that one of the key things is number 3 here, anticipating user needs, because actually sometimes with personalization, people get a bit too obsessed with it's only a data thing, but actually they need to be, it's actually just about being more customer focused and user centric. It's about, if there's no difference in needs between any group, then there actually isn't an opportunity for personalization, because the needs are the same. So what's the point? Yeah. So sometimes it's just about considering where the biggest gaps are in user needs between different groups is almost the user-centric, the starting point for the biggest opportunities for personalization. And that's a good, so you need to step back a bit, I feel. And again, that kind of comes back to 2 and so 2, 3, and 4 are pretty much connected, aren't they? And getting a bit closer to them. So, for example, if they're like in your article, Mark, about if someone's in store and using the QR code to access the website, they're in store. You can start to get a bit closer to understanding what their needs and wants would be if they're in store at that point, accessing a website from there. So why should they get exactly the same experience as everyone else who's on a sofa at home, or someone who doesn't even know the brand yet, or someone who's just randomly coming across you? You know, that's a very different need to someone who visits you every single day and is a current customer. Again, you can see that there's going to be potentially a big gap in user needs between those people, and that should be your starting point for personalization, I feel.
Yes. Now, I'm conscious, as usual, we're running out of time. I've realised we've got 3 minutes left, and I promised that we'd leave some time for questions. Sorry, I mean, all of these themes, and as I'm sure anyone listening can tell, like all four of us could quite happily talk about this for a lot longer. We won't do that today. We'll cut it off fairly soon. We did want to mention at the end, if you wanted to carry on this conversation, so, I mean, obviously you can reach out to Alex and Hamish. I'm sure you guys are happy to be connected or contacted by people. Also, all of us will be going to this conference later in the year. I'm quite excited about the Experimentation Elite, first physical in-person conference for a while for many, and particularly one focused on experimentation. I think Alex and Hamish might be speaking at the event. I forget the exact logistics, but if anyone's interested, wants to come along, register and come and meet us there. And I will jump into that. We've got a little poll or a chat section to see if we have any questions. Actually, not a question, but Jackie from Experimentation just reminded me there is also an awards as part of this Experimentation Elite conference. Jackie, I can't remember the deadline for submitting your award nominations, but thank you, 11th of March. Isn't technology wonderful? So, guys, if you're really bought into all these topics and doing some really cool stuff in experimentation, get some recognition for it and get your submissions into the Experimentation Elite guys, and you could be winning awards later in the year. I think haven't got any particular questions coming through. Lots of comments, people thanking us. I think we're actually on 59, so we're pretty much on time. I guess I would just at this point just say thanks Alex and Hamish for putting time aside. I know you're both really busy at the moment, so it's hard to kind of carve out an hour, and I really appreciate that. It was, as I say, I really enjoy these conversations. There's loads more we could talk about. I'm sure we will do over a glass of wine or Coke at some point. For anyone on the call, if you wanted to ask these guys more, get in touch, and I'm sure they'd be happy to chat. Thanks for time, and thanks for everyone who dialed in and listened, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers, guys.